So this is me sitting at the side of a pond, complete with bug bites. This is me in my natural habitat. I'm going to talk to you tonight a little bit about amphibians, and I've tailored it specifically for the Athabasca region because, you know, I thought, why not? I live here. Let's talk about the really cool amphibians that are here. And we have some really great characters that live in this neck of the woods. Now it's doing something funny. Please stand by. My chat box. Oh no, you guys can see the chat box. Oh no. Okay, I guess no chat for me. I'm gonna have to think that this works better. Is that okay, you guys? I hope so. Somebody can unmute and talk to me. That would be good too.
Looks good.
Better.
Okay. I'll just yell at you if I have a question.
Sounds good. All right, before I get started, though, I think it's really important to acknowledge that we are here in Athabasca on Treaty 6 land. And I just want to acknowledge the Métis and First Nation people. Pardon me, as my nerves get a bit of me here. I just want to acknowledge as well that my work takes place on Treaty 6, Treaty 8, Treaty 10, and Treaty 11 territories. I want to give a big thank you to the invitation that was so kindly extended to me from Science Outreach Athabasca. And it is so beautiful outside tonight. I really want to thank all of you guys for joining me here tonight. You could be outside enjoying the weather, but here we are. Let's talk about some frogs. So overall, I have a few goals for tonight's presentation. In general, I just want to introduce people to some of the amphibians around us in general. And then I want to give you some specific information about them. And I would like to also suggest some helpful user-friendly resources about amphibians that people might not be aware of. And hopefully this will inspire a few of you to look for amphibians on your travels this summer. I suspect I may have a few birders in the mix here. So, you know, if you're out on a birding expedition, just look down. I often joke with my friends that my greatest impediment to being an excellent birder is the fact that I usually am looking down because I want to look for the frogs. So, and people who know me know that this is true. All right, so some vocabulary, just because this is a group of animals that maybe everybody's not as familiar with as some other groups. Some people might be familiar with the term herps or herpetofauna or herptiles. And that's kind of a collective term for amphibians and reptiles. And the thing is, that's kind of an artificial clustering of organisms, evolutionarily speaking. It's kind of a historical throwback to a time when we understood these animals a lot less. And the thing is, it lingers on. So herpetology is the study of amphibians or reptiles in sort of the same way that you might say mammalogy is the study of mammals. Now, the study of fishes here is ichthyology, and this is a true story for those of you that don't know. One of the one of the biggest, and really one of the most fun meetings to go to as a scientist that studies these animals is it's a joint meeting of the herpetologists and ichthyologists, and it's affectionately known as Ix and Herps. And so you're going to go to Ix and Herps this year. And so some people might not know that, but there you go. There's a little geek humor for you on a Tuesday evening. So as I've mentioned, herps, that includes amphibians and reptiles. And we're not going to be chatting about the reptiles tonight, although Alberta does have some fantastic creatures. We're going to focus just on amphibians. And these are the newts and salamanders, which there's really no difference between them. They're just different. They're cousins within the same group called Caudata. And then we have frogs and toads. They're also cousins within the group Anura. And then there's a group of amphibians that many people around here may not have heard of, and they're called caecilians. That's that C word there, C-A-E, caecilians. And these are very fascinating, very ancient creatures that are found in the tropics. We could do a whole separate talk on just the caecilians, but we'll leave that for another day. Because we're focusing our attention on the amphibians here in the Athabasca region generally, we're going to only be talking about the caudata or caudates and the anurans. So there's some words that you might have heard before in your travels. So there are some characteristics of amphibians. So people often ask, well, so what makes an amphibian an amphibian? And one of the first things that comes to mind is, for many people, they're familiar with a sort of a usual life cycle, where you have the egg to the tadpole to the little froglet or toadlet coming out on land, and then the frog. And that's actually a very common life cycle in anurans. Those are the frogs and toads. There's similar kinds of life cycles with the salamanders. There are variations on a theme though, but just for example, all of their life cycles, however they all play out, they're all tied closely to fresh water. These guys can't get too far from water, particularly when it comes to reproduction. And this is a toad tadpole taken from a park that some of you might be familiar with. This was last July. Some other characteristics of amphibians that are important to note is that they have very thin permeable skin. And that means that things come and go very easily. Now, amphibians use that to their advantage because they use it for water absorption and gas exchange. Amphibians tend to dump the CO2 out of their blood, when they're doing their breathing, so to speak. They tend to dump CO2 through their skin more so than using their lungs. Oxygen in through the lungs, CO2 dumped out through their skin. Another characteristic of amphibians is that they regulate their body temperature behaviorally. Sometimes you'll hear the word they're cold-blooded, and that will be a term that gets used for things like reptiles and fish as well. And I have to tell you that term isn't particularly useful because it fails to recognize that all of these creatures do a very good job of regulating their body temperature exactly where they want it. They're not just at the whims of nature. They have to actually actively regulate. And one of the things that tadpoles do that is quite fascinating is that within a wetland, the temperature profile will change, say, over the course of the day. And they will migrate within that wetland so that their body temperature is where they want it to be. So often you will find them in the warmest part of up north here, you'll find tadpoles tend to seek out the warmest part of the wetland. And so they will be at the edges during the bright sunny day. And at night, they go down where it's deeper, where the water has retained more of the warmth. So that's something that people maybe didn't realize. So when you say cold-blooded, I think it doesn't really relate. It doesn't relay the complexity of what they're actually doing and how they're behaving in their environment. Just for completeness here, I will mention, many people probably know too already, that mammals and birds regulate their body temperature with their metabolism. In fact, that's one of the biggest uses of our calories that we intake, is regulating our body temperature. But amphibians, they're a little bit more cost effective. They just follow around the temperature that they want. Amphibians don't have claws or scales or teeth or hair. I remember I just mentioned a moment ago that they have very thin skin. And so if you have things like scales covering the skin, that would impede things like gas exchange and water control, water absorption. So you don't have those kinds of features on an amphibian. Amphibians are important links in food webs. Tadpoles eat, those are the baby frogs, they eat algae and water plants and each other. And salamander larvae eat aquatic invertebrates and each other. And adult amphibians eat invertebrates and each other. I stress this because one of the things that, especially in an area, one of the things that is interesting about amphibians is that they're extremely pragmatic. And if you think about how quickly a little shallow pool can dry in the summer, so it starts out maybe 3 feet deep in the spring and it's all dried out by the end of July, it's in a tadpole's best interest to get its job done and get out. And so what you will find is that tadpoles will cannibalize one another, especially under times of duress. And they do so in such a very sophisticated way that they preferentially eat other tadpoles that are less related to them. So they'll eat a cousin before they eat a brother or sister. And this has evolved multiple times in different lineages of amphibians. So they're cluing into things that are extremely intricate and very, very specific. And again, I said it was all kind of pragmatic. And if you think about it, you're like, whoa, I don't even have my legs yet. And the pond is drying. I have got to get out of here. How do you do that? You turn around and eat somebody who already has everything you need. So it's pragmatic. It's a little bit red in tooth and claw, but it's pragmatic. So this means that when you're looking at the food web dynamics of amphibians, there's always these extra loops in there that have to include cannibalism. And it turns out that it makes it kind of complicated to model some things. But another piece of this is that because of the role that they play in food webs and how they eat and they're eaten by and they eat other things, when you start losing amphibians from food webs, it has knock-on effects all throughout the food chain. So they're an integral piece of an ecosystem. So we've got, I'm going to guess that the folks that are joining us tonight, many people are familiar with the idea that amphibians can be an indicator of ecological health and integrity. And that stems from, in large part, their sensitivity to things like contaminants in their homes or perturbations elsewhere in the food web. And one thing I like to always tell people about amphibians is that they're not all the same. And in order to have a healthy community of amphibians, you have to have a healthy ecosystem. And I'm using the word community here like an ecologist. And in ecology, a community is a group of organisms all interacting with one another in one space. So it's different species. And the three creatures I have down here along the bottom, we've got a wood frog, well, left, right, we've got a northern leopard frog, we have a Canadian toad and a wood frog. As an example, these three species all need different places to overwinter. The leopard frog overwinters in deep, cold water where it doesn't go anoxic. The toad burrows down into the soil to get underneath the frost line. And then the wood frog's actually freeze solid under a layer of snow. But that means that that snowpack has to stay intact the entire time in the winter, because under about 30 centimeters of snow, it actually isn't minus 30 there. It's about -3, as long as that snowpack is intact. So in order to have all of these species breeding in one wetland, all of their overwinter requirements also have to be met. So this all ties into the idea that amphibians are really important indicators of ecological integrity. I thought I would share some stats. I've put down a website here at the bottom. Since the chat's not going to work for me, I can't put this in there for you. Some of you might be familiar with the IUCN. You could kind of think of it like the United Nations of conservation organizations, and they rank scientists that collaborate with IUCN. They rank all of the different species on Earth, and they get an idea of how they're doing globally. What I've highlighted down here is the second row from the bottom. Hopefully people can see it. Amphibians as a whole, they're not doing so hot. There's about 7,000 or 8,000 species of amphibians, depending on how fine you split what an amphibian is, but there's well over 7,000 species, and a full 40% of them are either critically endangered, or vulnerable. So 40% of them, that's not so great. This bar graph here, there's also, you can see there are some gray bars. A gray section, it says DD, that's for data deficient. And that means there is literally not enough information available to rank a species. So I really encourage you to take a look at iucnredlist.org. Take and explore it. There's a lot of information there. This particular figure is captured from their summary statistics, and it's figure 2 if you'd like to go and look at that a little bit more for your own interest's sake. Because I suspect there's a lot of birders on the call tonight, I will just point out it's 1, 2, 3, 4 lines from the top there. I'm getting some feedback. Is somebody might not be? Thank you. 4 lines from the top, and you can see that there are no data deficient species for birds. And that is because people really, really, really love birds. I think that's what that reflects. There's a lot of species of birds and people really love them. So that's on a global scale. We have 40% of the species on Earth are demonstrably declining. And then there's another group of probably maybe 20% of them that there's just simply not enough information to even evaluate them. So what are these global causes of decline? Well, it turns out that there are causes that we hear these same stories in all sorts of taxa. Overharvest or introduce, or sometimes people hear invasive species. Land use change is the granddaddy of them. Once you put a housing development on a wetland, that's the end of the wetland. Climate change, that's a big conversation. Lots of people are looking at how this, what to think of it, what to do with it, how to mitigate it. We have contaminants and we have infectious diseases. And it's interesting. So this paper by Collins and Storfer came out in 2003 when I was a grad student. And when I was putting this talk together for you, it occurred to me that nothing has changed. And that's a little frustrating because here we are, 18 years later, and we don't really have any of this dialed in or harnessed. But we're understanding some of it a little better, but we certainly haven't come up with any solutions for several of these causes. In the big picture, some of you might be familiar with the idea that most life on Earth has come and gone before us. Various estimates, depending on how things are done, either molecularly or based on fossil records and what have you. But overall, there are about 99% of life on Earth has already come and gone. And so you get from that a sort of a background extinction rate. And we're talking extinctions that have taken place over millions and millions and millions of years. And so one of the questions that has been sort of needed to be sussed out was, so if amphibians are going extinct, is there a so what to it? And so one of the approaches that Dr. McCallum took was that he looked at what the overall rate of extinction was for amphibians historically, based on fossil records and things, but then compared to the modern day extinction. And the extinction rate that we are witnessing with amphibians is at least 200 times the background extinction rate, and it's accelerating. Now, this one kind of came out with the biggest sort of bang for its buck, and there's been follow-up studies that have kind of narrowed some of these margins, but the big picture is that amphibians are going downhill and they're doing it fast. So where do we stand with some of our Alberta's species? We have 10 species of amphibians here in Alberta, and I've put up some websites there. I'll leave that there for a second, and then I'm going to direct you to another website that might be of interest to some of our viewers. So this is where I got my information from. This is just a summary table from NatureServe. We have in Alberta, we've got 2 species of salamander, and they're quite closely related to one another. We have long-toed salamanders. They're vulnerable. Now, when you see this word vulnerable applied to our Alberta species, one thing you need to keep in mind is that some of them are vulnerable to disturbances because they don't have a very large range in Alberta. So that's one thing to keep in mind, but that's not all of them. So we've got we have 2 species of salamander. People might not have known that. We have 3 species of toads. We have boreal, Canadian, and Great Plains. We have 3 species of ranid frogs. We've got northern leopard frogs, wood frogs, and Columbia spotted. And you can see only 1 out of the 3 of them is doing okay. And then we have boreal coarse, and we have plains spadefoots. So when you kind of digest that all down, there's 7 out of 10 of Alberta's species of amphibians are ranked as vulnerable or imperiled. And those are for varieties of reason. Like I mentioned, that some of them, they don't have a very large distribution into Alberta as it is. Their geographic range just doesn't get that far. But then we have other species like northern leopard frogs, who used to be quite widespread, but they're not in the Athabasca region anymore at all. They haven't been for 20 years, 30, 40 years even, some of them. So So Alberta's amphibians are seeing the same sorts of patterns that are being witnessed globally in terms of declines of amphibians. Now, this is a website that I strongly encourage people to pop on over and follow along. This is one of the resources I'd mentioned at the beginning of my talk that I was hoping that people would sort of take away. Here's a resource for you to go in if you want to go and learn more, and there are nice keys for you to follow if you find an amphibian in the wild and you're like, hey, what the heck is that? I want to take a look. This is one of the things that I encourage you to take a look. If the address is all long and everything, go ahead and just Google Amphibians of Alberta, ACA, and you should be able to pop up to this site. So I'm going to introduce you quickly to some of the species in our area. We have here a wood frog. I'm going to start with wood frogs for a variety of reasons, but one of them is that they're the frog that people are most likely to encounter on their travels around here. I'll make a quick note here. Sometimes you're going to see scientific names. That's the one in italics at the top, Rana sylvatica or Lithobates sylvaticus. And sometimes you'll see scientific names change over time. And in case you don't know, I'll just mention here, it's fair to say, hey, what is going on with that? Why did they change the name? What are those guys doing? Don't they know what they're doing? And in fact, they do exactly know what they're doing. The names get changed to reflect new information as it becomes known to science. And so sometimes scientific names get adjusted, and it's to better reflect basically the evolutionary history and the relationships of the organisms involved. So you'll see that with amphibians. Sometimes you'll have an old name and a new name, and you're like, what the heck is going on? That's what's going on. You're just seeing science in action there. One of the really interesting things about wood frogs this far north, and especially as we go further, is that they get really colorful. And you see colors of wood frogs here that you do not see in Southern Ontario, which sometimes throws people for a loop. These three little froglets here were all from the same pond near Fort Liard. And you can see they're speckly and they're red and they're all sorts of gorgeous colors. Here's a couple more. These are in the Fort McMurray area. The little guy on the right, the camera hardly did it justice. The frogs at this one particular site are almost tomato red. They're brilliant, just gorgeous. So this, and you can see some of them are stripy and some of them are not stripy. Here are some wood frogs from up in the Fort Smith area. If any of you have had the opportunity to travel around there, you can see the one on the left. Now that is starting to look like a very different looking frog. It is in fact a wood frog. These are two more, a different pond. So where do you find wood frogs? Well, wood frogs, they can be found in a lot of kinds of habitat. They can be found in fens. They can be found in shallow water, shallow open water like this. You know, this is shallow the whole way across because you can see the pond lilies go all the way across. This particular water body, although it's quite wide, it's maybe 3 feet deep at the max. It's a nice, beautiful site up in the Birch Mountains. You can also find them in naturalized borrow pits. And I have to tell you right now, borrow pits and dugouts, they're some of my most favorite kinds of wetlands out there. They are an extremely unsung hero in terms of biodiversity and geohydrology. They're just an unsung hero out there on the landscape. So naturalized borrow pits. In case anybody is interested in listening for frogs, which hopefully some people might be interested in doing, I've grabbed a figure here from an inventory guideline, the Government of Alberta guideline here, and it just sort of highlights for you how early wood frogs start calling. So it's got the red box there. Hopefully everyone can see it. Depending on where you are in Alberta, these guys can start calling as early, well, they could be calling already in Southern Alberta in the areas where they're found. They're not found where it's really dry, but the further south, the earlier it goes. And you'll see here that by the May long weekend, everything is done. Everything is done. So amphibians are very much a creature of the spring, and they get her done fast, early. Wood frogs tend, and all frogs in general, all the ones that I found, they tend to lay their eggs. They're not out in the middle of the water where it's deep and cold and there might be fish. They're in these like little warm pockets, little oxbow type things, but mini oxbows. They're where it's warm and sheltered, and there's like less likelihood to be a lot of fish. You tend to find them here. Now, northern leopard frogs do some things differently, but in general, this is a pattern that you'll find. So if your travels this spring take you to any sort of pond, look along the edge. That's where they might like to be. These are some newly laid wood frog eggs. You can tell they're newly laid because they're all nice and tight and packed together. This is a picture of 3 clutches of wood frog eggs, and each clutch would have come from one female. So that would be her entire reproductive output for that year. Wood frogs and most of the amphibians in our area, they lay their eggs in very shallow water, maybe 20 centimeters of water. And wood frogs and chorus frogs, they lay their eggs when there's still ice on the middle of the pond if the water body is big enough. So looking at this picture then, this is hundreds of wood frog clutches. And again, you can see that it's very shallow water. And one of the things that happens with that is that wood frogs kind of play this game of they need as much time as they can. So they get out and they breed as early as they can. So those tadpoles have as much time in the spring as they can. But it makes them very, very vulnerable to freezing events, late spring freezes, or drying events if we have a really dry spring. It also makes amphibian eggs extremely vulnerable to quads riding through wetlands. And nobody gets up in the morning and says, gosh, I really hate all the wood frogs. I'm going to go drive over all their eggs. Nobody ever says that. But I do think that there are people who do a lot of damage and they don't realize they're doing damage because they just drove over hundreds of females worth of eggs there. So keep the quads out of the wetlands. That would be a really important thing. And then going back to the idea of freezing events and drying events, we started talking about climate change before. Well, this is one of those other areas where unpredictable weather patterns are going to have a big consequence for amphibians. These are a little bit older wood frog eggs. And then these are some hatchlings. Now I'm going to see if my video works. I'm watching the time a little bit here. I don't want anybody to get too bored. I'm going to see if I can get this video to play for you. There's no sound, but let's see if it'll play. So this is right when they're hatching. And if I recall correctly, this video was taken on May 11th. It's very early in the year. Some of you might know or might not know, there are actually really descriptive ways to talk about the amphibian tadpoles that you find. So I'll just briefly mention something here called Gosner stages. And Gosner is a person's last name. And this scientist wrote a very, very influential paper in the 1960s where they standardized and gave names, basically these stage numbers, to what was going on with tadpoles so that people could say, hey, the tadpoles in my area are at stage 36, for example, and somebody else could compare it in another way. These tadpole stages, they're not linear. So a tadpole can move very quickly from, say, stage 1 to stage 25. They can move, and that would be a hatchling. They can move through that quite quickly, but then they can spend weeks just dwelling between stages 26 and 36. And all they're doing there is eating and getting bigger. Inside, there's a whole lot of internal rearranging that's going on and all sorts of development of hormone functions and all of the other things they're going to need to get on to land and go on and have a full productive life as a frog on land. But from on the outside looking in, they just hang out and eat and get bigger. So you can have animals at the same stage of development be very different sizes. And that's actually important in terms of comparing the health of wetlands, because you can say, boy, are those frogs at the same stage of development for what size they are. I'll just briefly mention here, I was talking about Gosner stages and stages of development and things like that. One of the things that I spend an awful lot of time, energy, and I guess intellectual energy on is some research investigating and monitoring the health of ecosystems, wetland ecosystems up in the oil sands. And some of the questions that my collaborators and I have been working on and chewing on for years include things like contaminant levels and indicators of chronic stress and disease dynamics and prevalence of outbreaks and things like that. So the reason that I popped this after the Gosner stage one is that staging tadpoles is actually a really important component of things. All right, let's meet another cheeky character here in Athabasca and elsewhere. These are boreal coarse frogs, and many people may have heard these guys. I put the little logo of that Alberta Conservation Association website up at the top to encourage people, to remind me to encourage people to go and check that out as we're going along here. These guys are tiny. A gigantic, huge adult is like 4 centimeters long, which is like that big. It's like just this big. That is a gigantic chorus frog. But they make a lot of noise. They're loud. They sound like somebody running their thumb along a comb. Just like the wood frogs, these guys get out early, and you'll find wood frogs and chorus frogs in the same pond, calling at the same time sometimes. There's some research to suggest that maybe these guys compete with one another, and the wood frogs eventually outcompete chorus frogs when water depth is deeper, because wood frogs can take a little longer to get out there. But it's been my experience that you can find them calling in the same wetlands frequently. All right, I'm going to try another video here. I'm hoping that these are working. Remember, I can't see the chat, so I'm hoping that everybody is still with me here. All right, hopefully that worked. You guys could hear some frogs calling and give you a little bit of spring fever. So chorus frogs lay their eggs where it's very shallow, just like the wood frogs do, but not surprisingly, their egg clutches are even smaller. They're tiny. So in the yellow circle here on the left picture, those are some chorus frog eggs laid on some vegetation, and they're just little. They're just much smaller little frogs. That's what they look like. Their range goes all the way up towards Norman Wells. And one thing I'll pop back here quickly. Oh, no, it'll be coming on the next one. Their range isn't particularly well understood. And so right now I'm collaborating with some other amphibian enthusiasts from GNWT and also Laurentian. And we're actually looking at chorus frog distribution questions up in the Northwest Territories. It's pretty exciting, and we're getting all sorts of surprises about just how tough these little guys are. Next, let's meet northern leopard frog. This is a species that positively collapsed in Alberta and BC. These guys just collapsed, especially in the 1980s. It's not entirely clear what happened, but there's evidence to suggest that it was at the hands of a disease that we now know as chytridiomycosis. And that's a big, long word for a nasty fungal infection that seems to have wiped through North America in the 80s and 70s, 80s, and 90s. Now, it's not particularly well understood why some amphibians get really sick and die from this pathogen and others do okay. And in fact, that is an active area of research for many groups around the world. And these chytrid fungi are a major cause for concern. There's actually 2 of them now known to science. There's The first ones that were identified in the late 90s and the early 2000s. And then just in the last 5 or 6 years, there's a new bad actor has come on the scene called, well, we'll just call it B-Sal. And it has not been found in North America yet, but there's an awful lot of concern about it accidentally being imported into North America through the pet trade, for example. Some of you might know that the global hotspot for salamander diversity is actually the Southern Appalachians. And there's a lot of concern about loss of biodiversity if that pathogen gets into those ecosystems. So it's possible that the leopard frogs we saw, the collapse we saw in Alberta was linked to that pathogen. Nobody knows for sure, but there's a lot of evidence that supports that. And it has been the focus of a lot of reintroduction programs here in Alberta. There's a lot of people who've worked really hard. And so I mention it here because if anybody sees these guys on their travels, there's a lot of biologists that would love to know. One thing I want to highlight for you is notice the unusual range of this species up in the Northwest Territories. I don't know if you can see my cursor here, but up here, what the heck is going on there? It's not clear if this is actually just the range and it's just not well understood up in the northeastern part of Saskatchewan, northwestern Saskatchewan, or if there was a range contraction. We don't really know. But we do have this picture is from a guy up by Sioux Lake that I took this picture. So Sioux Lake in the Northwest Territories. These guys are also really early callers, early breeders. Again, you'll find these guys at their breeding ponds when there's still ice on them. And at least in the Northwest Territories, this is what some northern leopard frog habitat can look like. It's pretty spectacular. All the NWT is gorgeous, spectacular. Now, a quick comment about IDing leopard frogs and wood frogs. This is one that is this is a hot topic if you happen to be an environmental biologist. I'm going to start easy. On the left, we have a northern leopard frog, and on the right, we have a wood frog of a color morph that would be readily recognized by people, particularly further east and south in the range. This one, easy peasy, right? No problem, northern leopard frog, wood frog. Oh, okay. Starting to get a little bit trickier here. They both have a white lip, they're kind of speckly. How do you tell these guys apart? The northern leopard frog, one of the things you can really look for is you can look at the spots on their back, and can you see how they have a light ring around the dark part? Okay, that's one of your really important clues. And they also have these dorsolateral folds on the side of them, and they're usually distinctly colored. So for those of you guys that are following along on that ACA website, that'll be one of the characteristics that's highlighted for you. Now I'm going to make it even harder. Okay, which one's the northern leopard frog? Which one's the wood frog? You can see it can be quite tricky. One of the problems with people misidentifying northern leopard frogs is that they are a listed species. And if you don't really have a northern leopard frog there, you're kind of introducing noise into the monitoring of how the species is going. So you got to really make sure you know what you're looking at. And if you're not sure, take a lot of pictures. Then they have to be in focus. You cannot send me pictures of things of some unfocused frog jumping through the grass. I can't identify that. Even if in my heart, I wish I could. All right, I'm cruising along here. I'm watching the time. I know lots of people have things to do. We do have some wonderful toads here in Alberta, and we have 2 species in the Athabasca area. Now, one of the things that people might not be familiar with are cranial crests and parotid glands. The cranial crests are between the eyes. They're like little bony ridges that may or may not be there, and that's the distinguishing characteristic, is whether they're there and what shape they are. And then the shape of the parotid glands. And those are the big glands right behind the eyes. So we have Canadian toads here and further north. Again, following along on ACA if you're there. And you can see on the little toadlet, it's pretty hard to tell. You can see how little this toadlet is. But you can see that you've got these 2 parallel crests between the eyes. And it shows up really well in these pictures. These are some Canadian toads. an amplexus on the left-hand side, and on the right are some little toadlets from up by Fort Chip. And just like we saw with all of the other amphibians so far, color is not a useful characteristic to identify them. They are highly variable in color. So if you say, yeah, I saw a brown frog with a stripe, I'd be like, wow, that's like all of them. So you got to really be looking for these distinctive characteristics. Now, let's see if this will work. These are some Canadian toad tadpoles. I hope my videos are working. So these guys, you can see they're in extremely shallow water. They're not hanging out in the deep depths of this pond. There's way deeper parts in this wetland, but they're all here. All right, hopefully that worked for everybody. You guys could see these little toad tadpoles. This is a site near and dear to my heart. This is near Fort Smith. This is in Wood Buffalo National Park. And there are wood frogs, chorus frogs, and Canadian toad habitat there. The two pictures here with the bison, they were taken several years apart. I want to tell you this story for a variety of reasons. For starters, it's always an interesting challenge to be trying to do amphibian work when the bison want to be at the same place that you do, and obviously they win. But the fellow on the right, he's digging down in the sand, and he created that little divot in there. He created that wallow. And this was in a year when the water was fairly low. And what happens in the years when the water gets higher in this wetland is that actually fills up. And in subsequent years, there was actually water there. And so what you end up having is this connection between the animals around the water and the animals that are in the water. Everything is connected. It's always connected. So anyways, I just thought I would share this. This is what some habitat can look like, and Canadian toads and bison have a close connection there. It's also just a beautiful place. Now, the other toad that we have in the Athabasca area is a boreal toad, or some people call them a western toad. I call them a boreal toad. They're the same thing. These are two boreal toads that I've taken pictures of in the very recent past at places that folks on this call might be familiar with, Lawrence Lake and Jackfish Lake. And I'm looking at Lawrence Lake now, and I think I've misspelled that one. So nobody put that in the chat. I think I got that one misspelled. But anyways, so these are some toads that I found moving on their merry way. Notice that these guys have no cranial crest. It's all smooth, and they have really round parotid glands. But look at the colors. It's not useful to tell me that it was brown with a stripe or without a stripe. It's not so helpful. All right, here's another one. And you can see that its range, generally it's speaking, it's on the west. And this species seems to be migrating or moving eastward. Now, whether that's a true pattern or whether or not we're just coming to understand the distribution of this species better, it's not really clear. But western toads or boreal toads seem to be moving eastward in Alberta. These are some little toadlets. I want to just highlight how small these guys are and how vulnerable they are. How small these guys are when they first come out of the pond. That's my hand with a ring with little frogs on it. And the little guy on the right, that is a boreal toad that I saw in Jasper National Park one time. And it is in the claw print of a dog print on the side of the wetland. So that little toad is hanging out in that claw print. Toads are really small and they're very easily overlooked. So it's a good chance that you might actually see these guys but not realize what you're looking at. They can be jumping around in the moist grass and they just look like little crickets. Now the Canadian toad and the western toad, you'll see that they start calling later in the year than all of all those other characters we've already met. And the other thing about them is that they can be influenced quite a bit by spring rains and when things start to get going. So when it comes to monitoring amphibians, it's actually important to be making sure you are structuring things in a way that you would capture the toads as well as those early spring breeders. If you happen upon a tadpole, if you're so lucky to see a tadpole, you can't always tell them apart all the way, but you can get a good idea of what you're looking at. The little creatures on the left are some boreal toads, and the creature on the right is a wood frog. And some things to be looking for, or at least taking pictures of, is see if you can get a picture of where the tail membrane inserts onto the body. The toad tadpoles, it's really low and far back. And they're just like low riders, low profile little creatures. The wood frogs, they're kind of like a big golf ball with a feather sticking out the other end. Their dorsal fin or their tail fin inserts very high up on their back. So that's one of the things that you can see. And one of the other things about this picture, if you remember back to that comment about Gosner stages, like stages of development, these frogs are actually at similar stages of development, but you can see how different size and shape and color they are. Now, the last creature I really wanted to introduce tonight, and many people may already be familiar with these guys, these are barred tiger salamanders. And in theory, they might be here, they might not be here. Personally, I just really haven't seen a tiger salamander in the wild for a while, and I would just love to know if people have them on their property and if I could come and visit them. But if you've seen tiger salamanders, this is actually a species that currently it's listed as apparently secure, but there is a huge growing concern that tiger salamanders are not seen where they used to be anymore. And I got to tell you, these guys are incredibly tough. So when we're starting to lose our tiger salamanders, we know something's up. So if you have tiger salamanders and you're excited about amphibians, I encourage you to share your findings, and I'll talk about some different ways to do that towards the end here. But if you've seen tiger salamanders, boy, I would love to know. And you should really think of these guys are fantastic. These guys are great. I could tell you a whole hour of stories about tiger salamanders. Many of you might fall asleep, but I would be having a great time. Okay, one thing that I wanted to mention to you guys, something that's kind of growing in terms of use and popularity because of its diverse applications, and these are automated or autonomous recording units. And these are devices that get mounted out in nature. They're battery operated, and they record sound, and they're programmed to turn on at certain times and turn off at certain times. And it's a way to sort of sample what's going on at a wetland or any place. Of course, I'm always thinking about wetlands, but they're a way. I know the birders out there, I saw some names on there. They're probably like, you don't need to put them in a wetland, but I would put them in a wetland. But you set these up out in areas where you want to monitor what's going on, and you can record songbirds and whoever else is there. And then you retrieve the cards, and then you analyze the recordings. And I'm going to hopefully be able to demo something for you if you guys haven't all run away. I'm going to stop sharing this one. And I'm going to try and share. Please stand by. Okay. Can everybody see this? It should look like, it should be black with some green splotches on it. Hopefully you can see that. Oh, thank you. Okay, somebody out there. There's still somebody out there.
Yeah,
okay.
There's lots of us out here.
Okay. I know I'm just like talking in my basement, hoping that people are not thinking I've lost my marbles. Here we are. I'm going to play this. Hopefully everybody can hear it. Some of you might recognize this. Okay, in the background there, so hopefully people recognize that white-throated sparrow, and then there's a couple other characters in there. But I'm gonna just scroll this along here for a moment, and I'm gonna show you right here, down here in the front, hopefully my cursor is working there. These are wood frog calls. And right here, we've got some woodpecker calls. Or not calls, knocking. So I'll just play this for you, just because it's nice to listen to the boreal forest. But it's a really interesting way to experience sound. And this is part of the project that I've been working on with forest frogs. Okay. Hopefully that worked. Okay, I'm gonna go back to sharing. I've got just a few more slides. Hopefully that worked okay. Get myself set up here again. Okay, so in case that hadn't worked, I just put in a few screenshots here of what it looked like. So here's some wood frog calls. And these are some chorus frog calls where the yellow arrow is pointing. This down here, these are actually whooping cranes. Not whooping cranes, I wish. Sandhill cranes. This is what some sandhill cranes look like in this particular recording. And then this is a great cacophony of wood frogs, and there's some chorus frogs fighting for some airtime there. This is what that looks like. And so this brings me, I'm starting to wrap things up a little bit. Just hear me out, hear me out. I really wanted to just share a little bit of what should you do if you find an amphibian on your travels. And one thing that I would really encourage people to investigate is getting involved with some of these well-organized citizen science endeavors. There's the one that you've been, hopefully some of you might have been following along with that ACA site. You can sign up to be part of a volunteer monitoring program there. And there's also iNaturalist, which some of you might already be familiar with, but this is an extraordinarily well-organized, very easy to use platform, and you can upload your observations there. And one of the things that iNaturalist has going for it is that you can take a picture, and the AI that is sort of driving some of it can help you identify what you've got. And then another, you post it and you can say uncertain, you know, you think it might be a frog. Well, other participants will look at that picture, and if anybody knows what it is, they'll make a suggestion. And so you can interact with other naturalists as well, who are out there looking around at things. I have posted things of really cool fungus. I have no idea what they are, and apparently nobody else does either, because nobody's helped me identify them, but they're out there. I've taken pictures, and on my phone, I just take a picture and you can upload directly. So anyways, just consider contributing to that. I was mentioning a moment ago the situation with tiger salamanders and northern leopard frogs. Well, holy cow, you could have an awful lot of people interested pretty fast in what you're seeing if you start talking about some of those species up in northern Alberta here. What not to do? First of all, let me start by saying it's best to not handle them if you don't need to. But if you are going to handle them, say you're going to move them across the road, which is something that I do, keep in mind that anything on your hands that could hurt your eyes will hurt that frog or that salamander. So usual suspects, hand sanitizer, especially in this day and age, of course, bug spray, onions, salt and vinegar chips. If you've got anything on your hands, it will hurt their skin. We've talked a couple of times tonight about how permeable their skin is. So just keep this in mind. If you're going to pick them up, the best thing to do is have clean, moist hands. If your hands are dry, you're going to damage the thin mucus on their skin and hurt them. So you want clean, moist hands, and by moist, whatever wetland they're by, that's the water you should put on your hands. We're assuming you're not working in industrial sites here. again, it's best not to handle them. One of the things that can happen when you do handle amphibians is that you can accidentally transmit pathogens by handling one sick one and then handling others that are not sick. Now, there might be some of the audience, they're involved in environmental work, and then there might be amphibian salvage and translocation procedures, and I am happy to talk with you afterwards about some best practices. There are some guidelines out there, but if anybody wants to talk about this, like in a professional sort of workplace situation, just get in touch and we can come up with some ideas about amphibian salvage and translocations. But pathogen translocation is a really big problem. If you're going to pick them up, keep in mind that amphibians don't have ribs. There is nothing protecting their organs. Their ribs are these little bony processes that come out the sides of their vertebrae. They have nothing that comes around and protects them like this rabbit skeleton. So I know lots of people like, oh, as a kid, I used to just grab them and then they would jump away. And you don't know if they didn't just jump away into the vegetation and die of massive internal bleeding, because you've damaged their organs. You have to be so gentle with these guys. They don't have ribs. Another thing is they also have very thin skin. This has come up so many times. Many people might be familiar with that term, sedges have edges. Well, if you run a frog along a sedge, you can cut it in half. So just don't do that. You have to be so careful. And even when I'm training my field crews, not only do my field crews don't get to wear bug spray, there's no bug spray allowed on Team Frog. You wear bug jackets, but you also have to learn how to be really calm, and it's better to let the frog go safely than to have harmed it while trying to catch it. So if you don't have to pick them up, don't. Leave them be. If you find a frog on your travels, I strongly encourage you to admire them in all of their glory, because they are fantastic little creatures. Take pictures and maybe contribute it to one of those citizen science endeavors, and then just let it go on its way. It's probably fine, unless it's in the middle of the road. And then, we might have to have a different plan. And I guess I'll end it there. And thank you so much for your time this evening. You can find me on LinkedIn or ResearchGate or iNaturalist. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I will see what we've got here. All right. Okay, I'm gonna get myself caught up on the questions in my chat here. I see some. Okay, okay, handling, hopefully I got that. Did that helped? Okay. Are there any other questions or comments or anything?
Thanks, Danna. It's lots of comments on what a great talk you've done so far, and we really appreciate having you here. We'll open it up to anyone who wants to either unmute their microphone and ask a question now, or you can add them into the chat.
I have
Hi.
a question.
Go ahead.
It's Bryn. Hi, Bryn.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
I live in Saskatchewan. I'm wondering what amphibians live in Saskatchewan.
All of the guys I just told you about, except the boreal toads. So
okay.
What part of Saskatchewan are you in, Bryn?
I live in Regina, so southern Saskatchewan.
I love that part of the planet. I love it a lot. Yeah, so there are the tiger salamanders, Canadian toads. I don't recall, spadefoots maybe over towards Swift Current, just right in the north, right in the southwest part of Saskatchewan. Does that help, Bryn? So basically everybody in Alberta except the boreal toads, really.
Sure, that's great. Thank you.
All right. And I think, Robert, you had
It's Robert Holmberg. One of the things is that there's a sort of a hybrid zone between the boreal toad and the Canadian toad. Is anybody doing any work of what kind of hybridization might be occurring?
I'm not aware of anything there. It might be that those species are just overlapping. I think the genetics indicates that those two species aren't as closely related as they might be. I'm not aware. If anybody else knows, though, I would sure be interested. I will mention, though, that the boreal toads here in Alberta, apparently, they're oddities. They call. There are many. There's diffuse opinions out there about boreal toads that don't call. There are apparently some populations that don't call, and they're found in BC and possibly up into the Northwest Territories. And it's unresolved whether or not these are actually two different species, the calling ones and the non-calling ones. I think that there's an awful lot to still learn about these guys. So your question actually touches on a bigger question about how much is left to learn about the creatures we share space with. We don't really know what's going on for these guys. And where that moves out of an esoteric question and into one of a practical management question is that we don't really know if there's multiple species there, we don't know if they're all doing okay, because if we lump everybody together and they look like they're okay, we might actually be losing one and not even realize it. So I'm not sure that directly answers your question, but it does touch on the phylogenetics of toads in Alberta. And I think there's a lot of questions to still be sorted out there. Chris, okay, I see lots of questions here. I'll answer one that's fairly straightforward. From Laurel, do frogs and toads only call for mating? Yes, more or less. You'll find every once in a while there's some confused young male calling at odd times in the spring, and it's maybe some sort of a weather pattern has triggered it, but it's usually insincere and there's no females interested. They call one time a year, especially up here. Now, I know that down towards southern Saskatchewan, there were places where I was pretty sure that the chorus frogs were double clutching. There were two breeding periods, but I never had the time and energy to follow up on that. But by and large, yeah, one time only. And actually females don't, like if we're talking about wood frogs and stuff, they don't even breed every year. So you'll find a very biased sex ratio at ponds. Hopefully that answered. I'm gonna look up here. Velvet asks, do you put up the sound cameras in specific areas, and where would we get one to put one up? You can find them. There's a number of places that sell them. The equipment that I'm most familiar with is through Wildlife Acoustics. That's their name, and they're also the same people that sell the software that I work with. And where would I, in specific areas? Yeah, you basically any place you want to listen. One thing that I learned about was that actually some of these recording devices are being used to monitor poaching, because you can hear when a gunshot goes off. Like there's just a lot of applications. Anytime you want to be listening, that's one of the things you can do. When you played sounds around a pond, some voices were low and high. Yeah, do you know what? Every call is really distinct, and it turns out that it's faster to actually look for the signature of a frog than its call than it is to listen. It's faster to just scroll through and be looking for it. They all have really distinct little voices. Yeah, there's all sorts of crazy things I found, but I won't go off tangent. But yeah, it's been an exciting thing to learn and a really interesting way to experience sound. Ms. Godwin, how do you find a toad hibernaculum? You know what? You have to kind of be watching for it. They will be sandy. Generally, my experience is they're all sandy. They will have often a north, a south-facing slope so that they warm up. I don't find them on the north sides of things very often. What else? Boy, you got to be lucky. That's what it is. Figure out where they're calling in the spring. That's another way to do it. Figure out where they're calling in the spring and then look for likely candidates in that area. They're going to be up. They don't want to go down into the water. They're not like wood frogs. They've got to stay up out of the wet. So they're going to go up and into the sand and then they get down below the frost line. I don't know if that helped. We can always talk offline. I can tell you my experiences. Okay, can you talk more on sound machines? Can you click? Yes, you can actually zoom right in and highlight the areas you want to listen to. So maybe you see something, you're like, oh, I wonder what that is. And then you can highlight it and then you listen and you listen and you listen and then your eyes cross, but you listen and you listen and you can figure out what it is. You can figure it out. Oh, Allison, you were hearing some frogs. Okay, I'm so excited for you to upload it onto iNaturalist and look me up, and then I can see what you're finding out there too. A question from Kim. Do bait bans help protect amphibian populations? I think the answer is probably yes, but for a number of reasons. And one of them is there's the potential to overharvest things, and Manitoba had a big problem with some of this. There's an overharvest of some species because they're easy to collect. But the other thing is that there's disease transmission components. If you're not moving infected frogs around, you're not moving their pathogens around. And the other thing is that some of the species of frogs that get used for, or amphibians, larvae of any sort, get used for bait, they can end up becoming invasive species if they're released into that fishing pond or fishing hole, fishing area. So released bait can actually become a problem. So I do think that in areas where they've been implemented, that there's solid reasons to think about doing it. It's not always a popular thing. The alternative is use the frogs from that area, and then you're not releasing anything that wasn't already there. Muskie Creek trails. Yes, I see wood frogs. Oh, plenty. I see lots of wood frogs there. I've heard a few coarse frogs. I gotta say, along that creek, along that trail system, it's a little bit not the right place for coarse frogs. It's wood frogs who are everywhere, but yes. And I have had boreal toads in my garden a couple times. I've had, and we're up here on High School Hill, Old High School Hill. So yes, there are frogs right here in town. Absolutely. Any other questions? Road salt. Well, let's start with the fact that we need to have safe roads to travel on. Road salt can present a real problem. The literature out there is actually a little bit mixed on the effects, though. So what we're talking about is road salt is usually sodium chloride, which is like our table salt, or calcium chloride. And there are various studies out there that have shown all sorts of negative impacts on different kinds of wildlife. One of the most distinctive negative impacts is actually on birds that go down and they pick up the road salt, thinking it's grit, and then they've poisoned themselves. They get salt poisoning. So that's actually quite well documented in the literature. So then the question is, well, what do we use instead of road salt? Well, you know what? I would say that the jury is still out. But if I could take a step back here, I think that there's a growing recognition that we need to have safe roads to travel on in the winter. Nobody's disputing that fact. We need safe roads, but there is now more of an appetite to find alternatives And so when people voice their opinions and say, do we really need to be putting literally 1 ton of salt per kilometer of highway along Highway 63 every week for 6 months a year? Do we really need to be doing that? Maybe some other approaches can be found. And the thing is, a lot of people don't realize that this is a problem, but it is. That salt can also drain off into the low-lying areas adjacent to it. So you just have this increasing saltifying or saltification of wetlands. Saltifying, that's not a word. Saltification is what I was looking for. Saltifying. I'm gonna go write that one out. That's a good one. That's a Danna one. But yeah, so if people are concerned about road salt, let your representatives know. If there's an appetite, somebody out there, there are clever people out there that can come up with better solutions. Oh, I see someone here. One of the toads I saw last year was huge. It was either, if it was around here, it was a boreal toad or a Canadian toad. Both of those guys can get ginormous. Remember, they start out tiny. They start out so tiny. That is a buffonid characteristic. Yeah, I don't know. It's either one of the two of those ones. Both species can get ginormous. They are quite stunning creatures. Oh, Jerry, you saw salamanders in Muscade Creek. Well, maybe I better go check it out again. Yeah, you never know. It's been channelized and sort of the bank stabilized for, I mean, logical reasons, but yes, there's always trade-offs, right? So maybe I'll go check it out. Thanks for the tip. What is the lifespan of these assorted amphibians? That's not a particularly well-resolved question, and it's less resolved the further north you go. In general, most things like wood frogs, maybe about 5 or 7 years, 5 to 7 years is the lifespan in the wild. You can get them to live longer in captivity sometimes, but 5 years is not unusual. And keep in mind that, particularly with the females, there's evidence that they don't breed their first year. It's either their second or the third year. And so I'm talking about some of the frogs here, the ranids. And so they may only breed twice in their whole life. Twice, maybe 3 times in their whole life. There's some evidence that some of the toads can live a little longer, maybe 9 years. But again, we also see very biased sex ratios there. At the breeding ponds, you have more males than females. With salamanders, these guys can be quite long-lived. And they can just forego breeding on poor years. In captivity, it's not unusual for them to live 10, 15 years, 20 years even. So they can be quite long-lived, but only if they have some place to live. I guess that's the kicker there. So different, it depends on the species. Little chorus frogs, those little guys, maybe 3 or 4 years, that's probably an old chorus frog. Any other questions?
Hi, Danna.
Hi, Harvey.
It's thanks so much. It's wonderful. I just wanted to sort of build on something you said about potholes and how wonderful they can be in so many different ways. We put a dugout here on the farm a number of years ago, and I had great intentions of stocking it with trout and so on, and ended up just leaving it, and we didn't. But it's, you know, we've never had. Occasionally you would have songs, but we have every spring. It's like an orchestra, and we have a Wilson snipe that comes in the spring and winnows as it dives. So, you know, it's kind of a seasonal, almost predictable cycle of sounds you have there. But I don't know the frog and toad songs very well, but it's marvelous, just a marvelous thing. Haven't heard it yet, but I'm sure it's coming soon. It's got to warm up a little more, I think, but you know, it's wonderful. So I think anybody who can put a pothole or dig a dugout or whatever, no matter whatever purpose, you know, it really adds to the whole, you know, enjoyment of the atmosphere for humans. And and I hope for them too, for the frogs and the. One thing I wanted to ask you, because it's more in the reptile area, I've been reading that supposedly there's supposed to be garter snakes up here. I've never seen one this far north. Have you ever
I
seen
know.
one?
This was the other thing. I was like, oh, I've already got too many slides. Okay, if anybody has seen snakes, I am so interested. Okay, I'm going to talk about snakes, and then I'm going to go back to your dugout question or comment for a second, Herbie. Okay, so snakes. I think it was like maybe June 5th, June 6th. I was on my way out to Jackfish Lake with my daughter because it's COVID world, so where else are we going to go? I was driving out to Jackfish Lake, and I swear I saw a snake just book it across the road over into into a brush pile. I could not stop because it was not safe. All these things, and by the time my brain processed what I saw, I'm like, I'm pretty sure that was a snake. Now, there's no reason we shouldn't have red-sided or plains, so Sirtalis or radix. There's no reason we shouldn't have them here. Well, they clearly, if they're not here, then there's a reason. But I think when I look at the maps and I look at habitat, I'm like, oh, maybe they should be here. So if you see snakes, I'm also very keen on that. Now, I want to go back to your comment about putting in some sort of a dugout things. If this is something that you're thinking about doing, and depending on the uses for it that you have in mind, like a lot of people install them on their property because they're feeding using them for livestock, right? Very practical purposes.
Right.
One of the things, if you want to encourage amphibian use there, one of the things is to try and fence off part of the area so that the cattle can't stomp all over it, because if the amphibians are using it and the cattle are using it, you've actually created an ecological trap, because the amphibians will lay their eggs where the cattle will come to stomp on them. Not because the cattle mean to, but they're coming for a drink. So there are options out there, lots of options for having pumps and things like that that can take water out of the dugout and keep your shoreline intact. But in general, if you want to encourage amphibians, the other thing you should do is you should have gentle sloping sides on at least a couple sides, because the big bathtub shape that engineers like to build, I have a good friend who's an engineer, and we have this ongoing banter. He's like, if God didn't want straight lines, there wouldn't be rulers, and so everything is built like this, right? Which is not good amphibian habitat. So you got to have like gentle flowing sorts of edges, and in fact, this is an approach that you see being adopted quite. It's been embraced, I think is the right word to put it, in a lot of reclamation projects. Is that where wetland reclamation is being implemented, there's sort of there's a real thought to the topography and the shape instead of just big square bathtubs. Because the big square bathtubs, the sides are steep, the water is cold. It's not a great place for a frog, but you have these nice gentle places, and all sorts of creatures can come in and make a nice home there. So lots of thoughts. I mentioned that I might be the world's biggest fan of dugouts and borrow pits. I have no problems with them being full-fledged habitat. Love them.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Mo. All right. All right. Well, if there's no other questions, I know I've been chatting away, and thank you so much for your time, everybody, on this lovely Tuesday evening. Yeah, if you see herps of interest, feel free to let me know, because I'm interested. That's what I do. Thank you so much.
Okay, bravo.
Thanks, Lizzie.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Danna. Thank you for your time and for doing this for Science Outreach. We really appreciate it. If you wanted to maybe put your contact info into the chat,
yeah. Why don't I?
Others might want to send you some pictures that they find, or maybe give you a heads up on a location for salamanders.
Yeah, especially the salamanders or snakes. Holy man, I'll be out there. I'll bring my lunch. We'll go look for snakes.
Bravo.
All right, I'm gonna sign off. Linda, do you need me to do anything after this? Or
No, I think this is awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone. She's posted Danna.Schock at
Yep.
Pulse.
Palustrous
Environmental.
Palustrous means that's wetland in Latin. It's
Okay.
It's wetland. So there you go. That's a little bit cheeky. I don't know. That's me. All
That's
right.
awesome. Yeah, and we'd love to have you elaborate down the road if you have a presentation. That would be awesome. Thank you.
That was a great talk. Thank you.